not always been known as the orderly, neat, and disciplined country we recognize today. The modern image of Japan was shaped through a long historical process, full of conflict, violence, and struggles for power. Beneath the endless bustle of neon lights, skyscrapers, and traditional temples standing side by side in Japanese cities lies another world, an underground world, a criminal underworld that has grown over centuries. A world feared, yet at the same time, captivating the public's curiosity. The Yakuza is one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world, enigmatic, structured, and intimidating. While mafias in other countries often number in the hundreds or thousands, at the height of its power, the Yakuza in Japan had up to 180,000 active members. The Yakuza is not a modern phenomenon. This organization has existed for more than 400 years, growing and adapting alongside Japan's changing times, from the feudal era, wars, foreign occupations, to the modern industrial state. Despite its long and complex history, many people only know the Yakuza by their outward image: full-body tattoos, black suits, and brutal violence. In reality, the Yakuza has a strict internal structure and code of conduct. They often refer to themselves as Ninkyo Dantai, groups that uphold values of honor, loyalty, and hierarchy, even if carried out through criminal activity. Organizationally, the Yakuza consists of various clans or families, legally known as Boryokudan. Each clan is led by a boss, called an oyabun, a father figure who demands absolute loyalty from their members. So who are the Yakuza really? How can a criminal organization survive for centuries and even dominate Japan at the peak of its power? In this video, we will explore the history of the Yakuza, from its origins to its power structure, and how it built influence in the shadows of modern Japan. The true origins of the Yakuza are actually uncertain, as there is no clear historical consensus about them. However, according to theories and existing writings, there are 4 competing theories regarding the birth of the Yakuza. To understand their origins, we need to go back to the mid-18th century, during the era of the Tokugawa Shogunate in Japan. This was a period of long-lasting stability. Japan was closed off from the outside world, and society was tightly controlled by the feudal state. Japanese society at the time was organized under a rigid class system. At the top were the samurai, the military rulers. Below them were the farmers, the main pillars of the agrarian economy. Then came artisans and merchants, who were placed at the very bottom of the social hierarchy. Movement between classes was nearly impossible. Any deviation was considered a threat to social order. However, excessive order created new problems. The Tokugawa system was effective at regulating official life, but weak at managing activities outside the state structure. Through these gaps, groups emerged that were neither fully legal nor fully illegal. They lived on the fringes of society, operating in a gray area of the law, a space difficult for feudal authorities to monitor consistently. One of the earliest groups was the bakuto. They were traveling gamblers. Gambling was officially prohibited. However, large-scale state projects, such as road construction, dams, and mining operations, were filled with workers far from direct oversight by the central government. It was in these spaces that the bakuto operated. They ran gambling operations in worker camps, provided entertainment, managed debts, and indirectly helped keep social tensions under control. It was from this world that the term Yakuza emerged. The word comes from a traditional Japanese card game called Hanafuda. In the game, players try to collect card combinations with specific values. The term Yakuza refers to the combination Ya, the number 8, Ku, the number 9, Za, the number 3. When added together, the total is 20, the worst possible combination in the game, worthless and considered futile. Among the bakuto, the word Yakuza came to mean something useless, a failure, or someone with no future. Over time, the term broadened. It began to describe outcasts, bandits, and petty criminals. A second theory traces the Yakuza back to the tekiya, street merchants who flourished from the 18th to early 19th century. The tekiya controlled night markets, local festivals, and religious celebrations. On the surface, they appeared as ordinary small traders. But in practice, they held complete control over the economic space. They decided who could sell goods, arranged stall positions, collected protection fees, and maintained security. in their territories. In other words, the tekiya performed functions that would normally be the responsibility of local authorities, yet carried out informally, outside the state structure. In many cases, they maintained indirect connections with local officials. They were often used to maintain order during large festivals or religious events with crowds. Feudal Japanese authorities never officially recognized or approved the criminal activities of these groups. However, the approach was not total eradication, but pragmatism. Completely eliminating groups like the bakuto and tekiya was seen as too risky. Such actions could destabilize local communities, trigger new unrest, and spark conflicts that were even harder to control. For feudal rulers, crime was not understood as something that could be fully eliminated. What could be done was to control it. As long as these groups did not challenge state authority, did not disrupt the samurai class, and were able to maintain order in their own territories, their existence was tolerated. This relationship was never officially acknowledged. It functioned as a quiet compromise, an unwritten agreement between the state and the shadow world. Over time, the tekiya began to build internal organizational structures that mirrored the feudal order of Japan. The core principle was the oyabun kobun hierarchy, a parent-child relationship demanding absolute loyalty. From this structure emerged the concept known as ninkiontai, the idea that these groups were not merely criminal, but protectors of local communities and guardians of order in the outskirts. It is important to note, ninkyo was not legal legitimacy. It was an ideological narrative, a tool for social and internal justification that allowed these groups to survive, grow, and eventually transform into the modern Yakuza. A third theory traces Yakuza back to a group called kabukimono. The term kabukimono roughly translates as the eccentric or the crazy ones. Their origins are unclear, but many historians believe the kabukimono were descendants or continuations of ronin, masterless samurai who had lost their positions during the feudal era. Kabukimono were known for their flamboyant appearance and behavior. They wore striking, unusual clothing, had extreme hairstyles, acted provocatively, and almost always carried their samurai swords wherever they went. But the defining feature of the kabukimono was not their appearance, but absolute loyalty among members. They protected each other from any threat, even if it meant opposing their own families or communities. Some kabukimono were former samurai who had served directly under the shogun, including members of the Hatamoto, but had fallen from favor and become marginalized. The situation worsened during Japan's long peace under the Tokugawa Shogunate. With wars over, the state no longer needed large numbers of samurai. It is estimated that over 500,000 samurai lost their jobs and status, becoming ronin, samurai without purpose or protection. Some chose to wander the land. Others banded together and became bandits, robbing villages and small towns across Japan. Historical records from the early 17th century, around the 1610s, even mention that the most brutal kabukimono would kill innocents simply to test new fighting techniques or to see if their swords were still sharp enough. It is at this point that this theory sees the seeds of the Yakuza forming. Their main advantage was not social or economic legitimacy, but unwavering loyalty. This loyalty set them apart from other criminal groups of the time. In feudal Japanese society, the groups that would later be associated with the Yakuza began forming closed clans, resembling blood families, where loyalty to the group came above all else. The fourth theory about the origins of the Yakuza stands in stark contrast to the kabukimono theory. In this version, the Yakuza are not seen as descendants of brutal ronin or wild samurai, but rather as their opponents. Many Yakuza members, especially in their own internal narratives, portray their groups as the natural enemies of the kabukimono, ronin, and masterless samurai known for being cruel, uncontrollable, and bloodthirsty. According to this perspective, during feudal Japan, kabukimono often extorted villagers, plundered small towns, and killed innocent civilians for pleasure, reputation, or simply to show strength. In circumstances where the feudal state was not always present or slow to enforce the law in remote areas, groups of citizens emerged who saw themselves as defenders of the oppressed. They claimed to act to protect ordinary people, farmers, small merchants, and local communities, from the terror of kabukimono and wild ronin. To face this threat, these people began organizing themselves. They formed protection groups, relied on controlled violence, and placed internal loyalty at the foundation of their organization. In this narrative, the Yakuza position themselves not as aimless criminals, but as alternative guardians of order, protectors of their communities. From these four theories, it becomes clear that all can be linked to the historical origins of the Yakuza. Despite their differences, all members, whether bakuto, tekiya, kabukimono, or machiyako, shared a common background: living in poverty, involved in criminal activity, and unwilling or unable to fully integrate into mainstream society. For all four groups in these origin stories, their communities, what would eventually become the Yakuza, served as a family, a place to find help, care, and a sense of safety. The Yakuza structure is pyramidal and familial. This hierarchy is based on the relationship between oyabun and kobun, deeply rooted in Japanese culture. The oyabun is positioned as a parent or head, while the kobun is a disciple who works under the oyabun's guidance. As the parent, the oyabun is expected to provide advice, offer protection, and assistance in various situations. In return, the kobun must give complete loyalty, sacrifice their labor, and if necessary, even their life. Here is the Yakuza organizational structure, from highest to lowest rank. 1. Oyabun or kumicho. The top leader of the family, seen as both father figure and absolute ruler. All major decisions, from organizational direction to resource allocation, are in their hands. 2. Wakagashira. The second in command, right hand of the oyabun and potential successor. They oversee day-to-day operations and supervise all lower-ranking members. 3. Saiko-komon. Senior advisors of the family. They rarely appear on the front lines. Their roles include handling legal and financial matters, as well as maintaining external relationships. 4. Sohonbucho. Head of the organization's headquarters. They ensure all central orders are executed and maintain coordination between family divisions. 5. Shategashira field captains. They directly lead operations in the field and act as the link between leadership and lower-ranking members. 6. Wakashu mid-level active members. This group is divided into kyodai, or senior brothers, and shate, or junior brothers. They carry out the daily operational tasks of the organization. 7. Junko Seien. The lowest tier in the Yakuza hierarchy, they are probationary members. At this stage, loyalty and discipline are tested before one is recognized as a full member. In the world of the Yakuza, betraying the oyabun is worse than breaking the law of the land. From the start, the Yakuza understood one thing: they do not recruit just anyone. Most members come from poor backgrounds, marginalized communities, or individuals who have been cut off from mainstream society. For them, joining the Yakuza means gaining identity, receiving protection, and finding something resembling family. The bond between oyabun and kobun is more than an administrative relationship. It is sacred, sealed through ritual. One of the most important rituals is the Sakazuki Goto, a sake sharing ceremony. Through this ritual, a father and son relationship is symbolically created. This is not an empty formality. The ritual binds members emotionally, strengthens their sense of obligation, and creates a bond that is extremely difficult to break. In the Yakuza world, violence is not chaos. Unlike popular images, violence is never random. It is controlled, calculated, and often symbolic. Violence enforces discipline within the organization, resolves conflicts between groups, and sends clear messages. One of the most well-known symbols in Yakuza culture is yubitsume, the ritual of finger cutting. Yubitsume is an acknowledgement of wrongdoing. It is a symbol of shame and an extreme form of apology. By cutting off their own finger, a member shows willingness to sacrifice. This act weakens their fighting ability and symbolically increases dependence on the oyabun. It is not merely a punishment. Yubitsume is a social control mechanism that ensures discipline and loyalty within the group. Another equally important symbol is the full-body tattoo, known as irezumi. These tattoos are more than decoration. They represent permanent identity. The process is painful, expensive, and can take years to complete. Through their tattoos, a member signals long-term loyalty, willingness to endure suffering, and a break from ordinary society. In Japan, tattoos carry social stigma. Many pools, public baths, and gyms ban people with tattoos from entering. For the Yakuza, this social stigma is actually advantageous. The farther someone is separated from ordinary society, the greater their dependence on the group they have joined. In this context, the Yakuza create their own rules and values. They often claim to follow samurai principles. Some of these values are familiar: loyalty, courage, and readiness to sacrifice. But in practice, these values are applied differently. During the samurai era, honor served to serve one's lord and protect the interests of the state. In the Yakuza, the same value ensures that members obey the organization. Honor is no longer judged by right or wrong, but by whether someone is loyal and protects the name of the group. The Yakuza are also known for their semi-public presence. They have offices and clear organizational structures. This makes them appear as a part of everyday life. As long as their activities do not cause major disruption, at certain periods, their existence is tolerated by local authorities. Unlike the mafia in Italy or cartels in Latin America, the Yakuza developed differently. Their structure is more socially organized, deeply embedded in local culture, and grows alongside the history of Japan. The Yakuza do not aim to overthrow or challenge the state. They operate within a space under the state's control. Because of this approach, their existence has endured for centuries. In the mid-19th century, Japan faced a major crisis. Foreign ships began entering Japanese waters, and Western technology clearly revealed that the nation's defenses were far behind. The Tokugawa Shogunate, which had maintained stability for over 2 centuries, could no longer cope with the changing times. With its collapse, the samurai class lost its role. By 1868, Japan entered a new era. The Meiji Restoration brought rapid and sweeping change. The social class system was abolished. Samurai privileges were removed. Carrying swords in public was banned. A modern national army was established. Hundreds of thousands of samurai lost their status, income, and most importantly, their identity. The new state offered no clear place for those who had for centuries been the ruling class. Many samurais struggled to adapt. They were trained to fight and govern, not to trade or compete in a free market economy. Some became unemployed, others worked as informal security guards or mercenaries. Some joined criminal networks already accustomed to discipline and violence. When former samurai met bakuto and tekiya groups, strong alliances formed. Criminal groups provided networks and territories, while ex-samurai brought discipline, loyalty, and cultural legitimacy. From this union, the Yakuza emerged, more organized, more cohesive, and far more solid than ever before. In the early modern period of Japan, the Yakuza began to significantly expand their activities. By the late 19th century and early 20th century, the organization became increasingly structured and deeply involved in various illegal activities. As Japan moved toward a modern industrial state, the Yakuza adapted as well, changing themselves to survive behind the ever-changing face of Japan. During this period, especially when Japan began developing its film and entertainment industries, Yakuza activities flourished. Some Yakuza organizations even started bribing police officers, a practice that would become a long-standing custom in the Japanese criminal world. Industrialization forced the Yakuza to modernize. The oyabun realized that to survive, the Yakuza needed to step into the political arena. The first political direction they pursued was not a fluid ideology, but conservatism and nationalism. The figure most clearly embodying the union between Yakuza and politicians was Tōyama Mitsuru. Tōyama was known as an ultra-nationalist who, from a young age, revered samurai traditions and the values of feudal loyalty in Japan. In his early 20s, Tōyama entered politics by participating in one of the last samurai uprisings against the modern government during Emperor Meiji's era. The rebellion failed, and Tōyama was sentenced to 3 years in prison. After his release, Tōyama did not leave the underworld. He instead consolidated the power of the Yakuza with early Japanese nationalist groups. Through this merger, Tōyama was able to suppress social conflicts in his area of influence. However, this stability was built on violence. He ordered his kobun to eliminate left-wing politicians who were considered obstacles to his nationalist agenda. After a series of political assassinations, Tōyama took the next strategic step, improving his public image. In the eyes of the local population, he appeared as a protector and symbol of nationalism. In a short time, Tōyama gained a reputation as a people's hero and secured both social legitimacy and political power. Toyama's influence peaked in 1881 when he founded the Genyosha. Genyosha was a secret nationalist organization that became the precursor to networks of Japanese patriotic groups. This organization united former samurai, tekiya, and bakuto, the main elements that later formed the foundation of the modern Yakuza. From the late 19th century onward, ultranationalism became an important component of Japanese politics. The Yakuza were no longer on the margins of power, but allied directly with politicians. The symbiotic relationship between the criminal world and the state, initiated by Tōyama, became a pattern followed by subsequent generations of Yakuza. By the early 20th century, many Yakuza syndicates had from the start allied with politicians and Japanese conglomerates. One of the most prominent was born in the city of Kobe, the Yamaguchi-gumi, the largest Yakuza family in Japanese history. The Yamaguchi-gumi began to dominate Japan's underworld in the early 1930s after eliminating their rivals. This success was inseparable from the leadership of Kazuo Taoka, a figure often referred to as the godfather of organized crime in Japan. Taoka was known for his ruthlessness, discipline, and obsession with organizational structure. During the 1930s and 1940s, he transformed the Yamaguchi-gumi into a massive criminal organization with nearly 13,000 members and influence reaching 36 of Japan's 47 prefectures. At the same time, Japan was moving toward global conflict. The attack on Pearl Harbor brought Japan into war against the United States. Japan's defeat, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the official surrender on September 2, 1945, opened a new chapter. The American occupation of Japan. This occupation created a major crisis. Food shortages were widespread, and the country was nearly paralyzed. In this situation, the Japanese population increasingly depended on the Yakuza, especially the Yamaguchi-gumi. Through the black market and underground networks, the Yakuza provided food and essential supplies, allowing many people to survive. The Yakuza, long associated with ultranationalism and extreme loyalty to the homeland, went further after the war. They exchanged weapons for tools, assisting in Japan's reconstruction informally. This aid made the Yakuza increasingly accepted by society, while also fostering a deep sense of indebtedness. Ironically, although the American occupation forces initially intended to eradicate the Yakuza, the policy did not last long. In the context of the Cold War, the United States chose to collaborate with the Yakuza, particularly to combat and suppress the influence of communism in Japan. Shared views on the threat of communism made the Yakuza and the Allied occupation authorities unofficial partners. Through the Yakuza, the distribution of aid such as rice could be controlled via the black market. This collaboration further strengthened the Yakuza's position, making them the true rulers of Japan's underworld in the post-war period. If World War II physically destroyed Japan, then the Cold War divided Japan ideologically. Leftist ideologies gained many supporters. The Japanese Communist Party grew to become one of the largest in the non-communist world. This perspective differed from that of the United States. In the context of the Cold War, Japan was considered a strategic region in East Asia. If Japan fell under communist influence, the regional balance would shift. For this reason, America's priority was clear. Japan had to be stable. The ideological struggle did not only take place in parliament, it unfolded on the streets. Labor demonstrations clashed with right-wing groups. Political violence became a part of life in major cities. In this chaotic environment, another ultra-nationalist Yakuza figure emerged, who would become one of the most powerful figures in post-war Japan, Yoshio Kodama. Kodama appeared as if to be the successor of Tōyama Mitsuru, bringing the Yakuza's history to an entirely new stage. If Tōyama had succeeded in building an alliance between the Yakuza and Japanese politicians, Kodama went even further. On December 24, 1948, Kodama opened a new chapter by establishing cooperation between the Yakuza and the Central Intelligence Agency. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, the CIA secretly funded Japanese nationalist groups, particularly the Yakuza networks under Kodama's control, to counter communist influence in Asia. From this cooperation, the Yakuza and right-wing Japanese politicians gained significant benefits. Millions of dollars flowed annually to support conservative political forces, including the Japanese Liberal Democratic Party. The post-war political direction of Japan, leaning toward conservatism, cannot be separated from Kodama's role and the Yakuza networks he controlled in exerting influence behind the scenes of national politics. After World War II, the alliance between the Yakuza and ultra-nationalist politicians gave the Japanese underworld far greater influence than before. Ultimately, the presence and interests of the United States in Japan became a tangible advantage for the Yakuza, allowing them to expand not only criminally, but also politically and economically across the country. By the 1950s, Japan was in a phase of significant transformation. Slowly but surely, the country began restoring its industrial strength and rising from the massive chaos left by World War II. A key turning point occurred in April 1952 when the San Francisco Peace Treaty was officially enacted. This treaty marked the end of the American occupation of Japan. With the occupation over, Japan regained full sovereignty. Free from foreign control, the Japanese government could fully focus on the interests of its people. National reconstruction efforts proceeded quickly and with clear direction. In a relatively short period, Japan managed to restore its economic strength, even rising as one of the countries with the largest economies in the world. Food availability became abundant again, social stability began to build, and people's lives gradually returned to normal. However, this progress and order were not welcomed by everyone. For the Yakuza organization, Japan's increasingly stable and prosperous condition was actually bad news. The gray areas that had long given them roles and influence gradually shrank as the state regained strength and was able to control its social order independently. As the war ended, the Yakuza lost one of their largest sources of profit, the wartime black market. At the same time, the oyabun, the highest leaders of the organization, began losing control over the direction of Japan's increasingly stable and orderly changes. In this situation, the Yakuza were forced to adapt. They shifted activities to other sectors that still left gray areas: prostitution, nightlife entertainment, gambling, and most significantly, drug trafficking. Drug trafficking was not entirely new to the Yakuza. During World War II, the use of stimulants, such as methamphetamine, among the Japanese military had already been common practice. Military superiors often gave them to soldiers so they would not feel fear, hunger, or fatigue during battles. These drugs were produced in very large quantities for wartime needs. When the war ended, the narcotics stock did not immediately disappear. Large supplies remained, scattered across various distribution channels. During the war, the Yakuza had established extensive networks, not only within the Japanese government but also intersecting with the occupation authorities and American intelligence. It was this network that made them aware of the location of these stockpiles. Soon after Japan began to recover, the Yakuza moved again. Narcotics were distributed across various regions of Japan. From this business, combined with income from prostitution, gambling, and nightlife, the Yakuza prospered once more. As Japan entered an era of change, the underworld did not vanish, it merely changed its face. In the 1950s, extortion became one of the main sources of income. Yakuza gangs grew rapidly and generated substantial profits. By the late 1950s, the Yakuza began to emulate the style of American gangsters. The emergence and widespread popularity of Hollywood films in Japan, both during and after the occupation, were not entirely coincidental. The idea actually came from Yakuza leaders, who saw American culture as a symbol of modern power. The appearance of the Yakuza changed drastically. They abandoned the old image and began wearing black suits, white shirts, dark ties, and sunglasses, a style that would later become an icon of the Japanese criminal world. Another major change occurred in the scale of the organization. The number of Yakuza members skyrocketed. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police estimated that in 1958 there were around 70,000 Yakuza members. 5 years later, in 1963, that number surged dramatically to approximately 184,000 people. This figure even exceeded the personnel of the entire Japanese armed forces during the same period. Tokyo, which had never been successfully monopolized by a single Yakuza leadership, gradually changed. Figures like Kazuo Taoka demonstrated that the centralization of power was now possible. In Tokyo, the Inagawa-kai emerged as the dominant force. In the process, they nearly engaged in open conflict with other Yakuza syndicates. However, under the influence and control of Yoshio Kodama, the major conflict was successfully averted. The climax occurred on October 24, 1972, when the Inagawa-kai and its rival groups chose to affiliate under the command of the Yamaguchi-gumi. This alliance marked the unification of the underworld with high-level political interests. Kodama became the central figure in this structure. He bridged the bright world and the dark world. In one hand, he held politicians. In the other, the Yakuza forces. It is not an exaggeration to say that from the 1960s to the early 1970s, Yoshio Kodama was one of the most powerful people in Japan. However, that power did not last forever. By the late 1970s, Kodama's career collapsed due to a major tax evasion scandal, a case whose roots actually dated back to 1957. At that time, representatives from the American defense company Lockheed were trying to sell fighter jets to Japan. To facilitate the transaction, the Japanese government made direct contact with Kodama. Kodama used his entire political network to secure the deal. The scandal later emerged as a large-scale bribery practice, ending Kodama's career and marking the end of an era of shadow dominance in Japanese politics. The collusion between Yoshio Kodama and the Japanese government finally broke in 1976. The scandal became national news and sparked public outrage. For many Japanese, the case was not merely a legal matter, but a betrayal of the nation's honor. Kodama was tried and accused of embezzling $6.5 million in income tax between 1972 and 1975. In addition, it was revealed that he received an extra $3.6 million in foreign currency. These figures further cemented Kodama's image as a blatant symbol of corruption. During the trial, public anger reached its peak. Japanese citizens protested and went to Kodama's residence, demanding that he be held accountable for his actions. Ironically, the ultra-nationalist groups, who had previously revered Kodama, now turned against him. They openly demanded that Kodama commit seppuku, believing he had tarnished the name and dignity of Japan. This moral pressure even came from ultra-nationalist politicians who had previously been his close allies. The Kodama scandal escalated into a national crisis unprecedented in scale. One day in the mid-1970s, the situation reached an extreme point. A man named Mitsuyasu Maino, a former film actor and ultra-nationalist sympathizer, attempted to assassinate Kodama by crashing a small plane into his house. The attack completely failed. The plane missed its target, and Maino died instantly in the incident. Since the scandal emerged, Kodama's health rapidly deteriorated. He never fully recovered, and on January 17, 1984, Yoshio Kodama died of a stroke in Tokyo. He passed away before his trial ever reached a final verdict. The death of Kodama and the major scandals surrounding him tarnished the image of the Yakuza widely. For the first time, Japanese society began to view the Yakuza not as a useful organized crime, but as a real threat to social order. However, public sentiment and negative publicity alone were not enough to weaken the power of Japan's underworld. At the time of Kodama's death, Kazuo Taoka, the leader of Yamaguchi-gumi, was 65 years old and still held significant influence. Under his leadership, Yamaguchi-gumi oversaw nearly 120,000 Yakuza members across Japan. Unlike Kodama, Taoka understood one important thing: a true Yakuza leader must remain in the shadows. Yet, even that caution could not save him from downfall. A decisive event occurred one night in July 1978. That evening, Taoka was sitting calmly in a nightclub in Kyoto, accompanied by 5 bodyguards. Suddenly, a young man in a white shirt rose from his seat, drew a .38 caliber pistol, and emptied the magazine at Taoka. The attacker fled, while Taoka was immediately evacuated in an armored Cadillac and taken to the hospital under heavy police guard. Soon after, through internal Yakuza networks, it was revealed that the shooter was a 25-year-old Yakuza from the Matsuda-gumi clan, a rival syndicate also active in western Japan. Revenge came swiftly and brutally. A few weeks after the attack, the oyabun of Matsuda-gumi was found brutally killed on a mountainside near Kobe. This incident sparked an open war between clans. Yamaguchi-gumi launched a massive retaliatory attack on Mitsuru-gumi. Clashes occurred in broad daylight, on open streets, and escalated beyond anyone's control, including law enforcement. Over the next 2 days, 5 other Yakuza clans affiliated with Mitsuru-gumi were drawn into the bloody slaughter. Meanwhile, Tōyama struggled to recover. The gunshot wound he suffered permanently weakened his body and forced him to retire temporarily. This marked the beginning of the collapse of Tōyama's power. Yamaguchi-gumi had become too dependent on Tōyama's central figure. Without his strong leadership, the organization began to fracture. Internal factions emerged, and subordinate leaders started vying for succession. Kazuo Tōyama eventually passed away in July 1981 from a heart attack, ending 35 years of leadership as the most powerful oyabun in 20th century Yakuza history. At the time of his death, Yamaguchi-gumi was reported to generate over $460 million annually. News of Tōyama's passing spread quickly throughout Japan's underworld. About 61,300 Yakuza members from more than 12,000 clans gathered in Kobe to pay their last respects to their oyabun. Yakuza leaders, major businessmen, and influential figures attended his funeral. Floral tributes arrived from all over Japan. Yet the most surprising event occurred after Kazuo Tōyama's death. His wife, Fumiko Tōyama, temporarily took over leadership of Yamaguchi-gumi. This event was unprecedented in Yakuza history. A woman stood as oyabun, albeit temporarily. Fumiko understood that her position was not a long-term solution. She led solely to maintain stability until a legitimate male leader could be appointed. The main candidate at the time was Kenichi Yamamoto, founder of Yamakin-gumi, the largest branch syndicate of Yamaguchi-gumi. However, this plan collapsed when Yamamoto died just 7 months after Tōyama's passing. For the first time, nearly 12,000 Yakuza gangs from Japan's largest criminal syndicate were under the temporary leadership of a woman. It was not until 1984 that a new oyabun was officially chosen. His name was Masahisa Takanaka, who then formally led Yamaguchi-gumi. Entering the 1980s, Yamaguchi-gumi and Inagawa-kai remained the 2 most dominant Yakuza families in Japan. However, a new phenomenon emerged, signaling a change in the underworld's direction. One notable syndicate was Sumiyoshi-kai. Unlike traditional Yakuza, this group was not tightly bound to the oyabun-kobun structure. In many ways, Sumiyoshi-kai was considered illegitimate by old Yakuza standards because it lacked a single absolute leader. Meanwhile, under the leadership of Issei Sagawa, Inagawa-kai expanded rapidly, becoming the largest criminal syndicate in Tokyo. In a short time, the organization involved about 7,500 active members, running drug trafficking, gambling, and extortion in more than 100 districts outside Tokyo. Within just 3 years, Inagawa-kai brought the Yakuza to a level of power never seen before. However, as before, the fate of the Yakuza was always closely tied to the condition of the Japanese economy. In the early 1990s, Japan entered a major economic crisis, one of the worst in the past 40 years. The crisis shook the entire national economic structure, including the underworld. For the Yakuza, the impact was devastating. Inagawa-kai and other syndicates struggled to adapt. The health of Issei Sagawa deteriorated, and in October 1990 he resigned as oyabun. Shortly after retiring, he passed away. Within 4 years, Inagawa-kai's revenue had plummeted drastically. The crisis triggered a major financial scandal. Bad loans totaling around $288 billion. The scandal became a reflection of the state's failure to control the Yakuza, a group that played a significant role in the shadow economy, yet was almost never touched by tax obligations. For the Japanese government and national police, the situation was a stark warning. Corruption was rampant, gang violence increased, and inter-clan wars occurred openly. The nation was on the brink of losing control. Finally, on March 1, 1992, Japan took a historic step by enacting the Act on Prevention of Unlawful Activities by Boryokudan members, the first anti-Yakuza law officially designating the Yakuza as a social threat. For the first time, the Yakuza were treated not as tolerated crime, but as enemies of the state. The Yakuza did not remain passive. They organized demonstrations, filed legal challenges, and openly opposed the law. Initially, the policy seemed successful. police announced that thousands of Yakuza had ceased their activities and dozens of clans were disbanded. However, the reality was more complex. Many Yakuza did not truly leave. They merely changed status, becoming associates or partners to avoid scrutiny. Statistically, the number of Yakuza dropped by about 10,000. Yet by 1994, nearly 80,000 Yakuza remained active, almost half operating covertly. The law did not destroy the Yakuza. It only pushed them further underground, making intelligence gathering more difficult. Facing domestic pressure, the Yakuza began seeking opportunities outside Japan. Traditional businesses such as gambling and extortion sharply declined. Thus, they shifted to international markets. In the early 1990s, the Yakuza entered the cross-border sex trade. Tens of thousands of women from various regions of Asia were promised jobs and better lives. In reality, they were drugged, trafficked, and exploited as sex slaves in Japan. This business generated billions of dollars annually. Yet drug trafficking remained the largest source of profit. Methamphetamine, long familiar to the Yakuza, was produced in East Asia and traded globally. Additionally, the Yakuza became involved in heroin and cocaine networks, cooperating with Southeast Asian syndicates. In the 1990s, representatives of Colombian cartels reportedly made direct contact with Yamaguchi-gumi to supply cocaine to Japan. This alliance became a nightmare for international authorities. Colombian cartels distributed cocaine to major cities such as Tokyo, Osaka, Yokohama, and Kobe. Following this, the Yakuza also built ties with the Russian mafia, taking advantage of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Stolen cars, weapons, and human trafficking became primary commodities. Even in the late 2000s, the Yakuza established partnerships with New York mobsters in illegal gambling. However, this global expansion brought serious consequences. Entering the 21st century, the Yakuza faced an identity crisis. A new generation became increasingly ruthless, individualistic, and no longer respected tradition. Loyalty to the oyabun waned. Samurai ideology was replaced by pure profit logic. A veteran Yakuza leader from Kyoto once told reporters that the new generation no longer understood the meaning of honor, discipline, and devotion. They did not live for the clan, only for themselves. This marked the most fundamental change in Yakuza history. An organization born from the ruins of 1945 gradually abandoned its principles. Solidarity collapsed. Obedience weakened. Japan's criminal underworld entered a new era, colder, more opportunistic, and more fragmented. Today, the number of Yakuza members has decreased dramatically. Young Japanese no longer show interest in joining. The state has closed all loopholes, even offering reintegration programs for former Yakuza. An ironic end for a group that once dominated Japan's underworld.